I still remember the sound of their laughter before it all shattered. I was standing in the doorway of our kitchen, a mug in my hand, ready to ask if they wanted coffee. My wife, Nora, sat at the table with her mother, Ruth, whispering like schoolgirls sharing a cruel secret. I almost called out to them until I heard my name. Nora's voice was low but clear. "He's getting fat and boring. I'm just waiting for the right time." Ruth's eyes lit up with a mean kind of approval. "You've been patient long enough, Nora. You deserve more than a man who's just there." They didn't know I was standing 10 feet away watching. The sound of my own heartbeat drowned out everything else. It was a kind of silence I'd never known before, sharp and cold, like the moment right before a car crash. My fingers tightened around the mug until I thought it might break. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just watched as the two women I thought were my family spoke about me like I wasn't even human. I wanted to believe I'd misunderstood, that maybe she was talking about someone else. But then she laughed, a soft, careless laugh that tore right through me. That was the moment I knew she meant every word. Ruth leaned in, smiling. "When will you tell him?" Nora shrugged, took a sip of her tea, and said, "When the time feels right. He's too blind to notice anyway." The room tilted. My stomach turned, and all I could think about was how many dinners I'd cooked for her, how many times I'd rubbed her shoulders after work, how I'd planned our anniversary trip just the night before. Every small act of love suddenly felt ridiculous. I realized that while I'd been trying to keep us together, she'd already been pulling us apart, piece by piece. I stepped back into the hallway, my heart pounding in my ears. They never saw me. I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wedding photo on our dresser. Her smile in that picture looked real once. Maybe it was, or maybe I just wanted to believe it was. That night, I didn't say a word. I moved my pillow to the guest room and told her I couldn't sleep. She didn't ask why. She didn't even look up from her phone. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the words replaying in my head. Fat, boring, waiting for the right time. Each one hit harder than the last, and that's where my story begins. Not with shouting, not with anger, but with silence. The kind of silence that changes everything, because when you hear the person you love the most say they're waiting for the right time to get rid of you, you stop wondering what's wrong with you and start deciding what you're going to do about it. That was the night I stopped being the man who stayed quiet. That was the night I started planning my way out. Before that day in the kitchen, I would have told you my life was ordinary, maybe even peaceful. My name is Elliot Granger. I'm 48 years old, a postal clerk in a small Ohio town where people still wave from their porches, and the grocery store cashier knows everyone's dog by name. My routine never changed much, and I took comfort in that. I woke up at 6, made coffee, read the local paper, and left for work in my old pickup truck that still smelled faintly of motor oil and cedar from the toolbox in the back. I'd been married to Nora for 18 years. We met at a county fair when she was 25 and I was 29. She had a laugh that carried over the noise of the crowd, bright and easy, and she smelled like apples and sunscreen. Back then, I was just starting at the post office, sorting mail in the back room and saving up for a down payment on a house. She worked at a diner, wiping down counters with a towel hanging from her apron. I loved how grounded she was, how she looked at the world like it still had magic left in it. When we married 2 years later, I believed we had everything we needed. We bought a modest house on Oak Ridge Lane, a white one-story with green shutters and a porch swing that creaked when the wind picked up. I painted every wall myself. Nora picked out the curtains and the dishes. She made it feel like home. For years, it was just us, and that was enough. We tried to have children, but after a few painful losses, we stopped trying. I told her I was fine with that, and she said she was too. But every now and then, I'd find her sitting in the guest room that would have been a nursery, staring at the wall in silence. My mother, Jean, passed away 3 years ago. She was a quiet woman, kind and steady, the kind who made you feel safe just by being in the room. I still remember the last thing she said to me. "Kindness doesn't mean being blind, son. It means seeing clearly and choosing to do good anyway." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. I thought she was talking about forgiveness. Now, I think she was trying to warn me. My sister Mara calls me every Sunday. She lives in Michigan with her husband and 2 kids. She's the kind of person who never lets you get away with pretending you're fine when you're not. Every time she asked how things were between Nora and me, I told her we were good. She'd pause, sigh, and say, "You sure about that, Elle?" I'd laugh and tell her not to worry. I didn't see the cracks forming, or maybe I didn't want to. Nora's mother, Ruth, had never liked me. From the start, she treated me like I'd tricked her daughter into marrying beneath herself. Ruth was a widow with a sharp tongue and an opinion on everything. Every holiday she'd comment on how our house was quaint, how I seemed tired, or how Nora could have done more with her life if she hadn't settled so early. I learned to take her words with a polite smile and a change of subject. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she got under my skin. Truth is, life with Nora wasn't bad. It just felt smaller than it used to. We drifted into silence during dinners. She scrolled on her phone while I watched the news. She started going out more with coworkers, claiming she needed to network. I told myself that was normal, that people grow and change. She was still beautiful, still the same woman I'd fallen for, even if her laughter felt a little forced when she was with me. I didn't see her restlessness as a warning sign. I saw it as stress. I thought if I cooked her favorite meals or planned small getaways, things would smooth out. For our 18th anniversary, I booked a weekend at a cabin near Lake Erie. I pictured us fishing, grilling, and maybe even finding a way to laugh like we used to. She smiled when I told her, but there was a flicker in her eyes I couldn't read. My days stayed predictable, and that predictability gave me comfort. I delivered mail along the same route for years. I knew every mailbox, every barking dog, and every old man who waited by his fence to chat. I liked the rhythm of it. People at the post office used to joke that I was too content for my own good. I guess they were right. I never imagined that being steady could make someone see you as boring. When I got home each evening, I'd see Nora sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, barely looking up. I'd ask about her day and she'd give short answers. When I tried to tell her about mine, she'd nod, distracted. I didn't press her. I figured love wasn't about constant excitement. It was about showing up day after day, even when things felt dull. One night after dinner, she said, "You never do anything spontaneous anymore." I told her, "I thought you liked that I was dependable." She looked at me, almost pitying. "Dependable isn't the same as interesting, Elliot." Then she stood up and started washing the dishes, leaving me at the table with my words caught in my throat. I remember lying awake that night, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me, thinking about how strange it is to live beside someone you love and still feel alone. I told myself it would pass, that all long marriages go through seasons like this. I believed that love wasn't supposed to be fireworks forever. It was supposed to be the quiet hum of a life shared. That belief kept me from seeing how far she'd already gone. I thought I could fix it if I just tried harder, if I reminded her of who we used to be. I didn't know that while I was planning our next anniversary, she was planning her way out. Looking back, the signs were there. The late nights, the sighs when I spoke, the way she stopped wearing her wedding ring around the house. I ignored them because I couldn't face what they meant. I told myself she was tired, that work was stressful, that she'd come around once we had a little time together. But the truth was simpler and colder. She had already stopped, seeing me as her partner. I was just part of the background now, a steady, familiar shape she'd grown tired of looking at. Before that whisper, I still believed love could survive on loyalty alone. I believed effort and patience could keep a marriage together. I had no idea that the woman sitting across from me at dinner was already halfway gone. And when I found out what she really thought of me, every quiet moment, every ignored sign, came rushing back in a single brutal instant. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind that usually drifted by without much notice. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and the roast I had left in the oven for dinner. Ruth was visiting again. I heard her voice carry through the house, smooth and deliberate, the way it always sounded when she was about to say something critical. I was in the hallway halfway to the kitchen, thinking I would bring in some iced tea. I never made it past the doorway. Their voices stopped me cold. Ruth said, "He's looking older every time I see him, Nora. You can't keep pretending this is what you want." Nora's tone was casual, too casual. "I know, he's getting fat and boring. I'm just waiting for the right time." It took a second for the words to register. When they did, it felt like someone had driven a nail straight through my chest. I froze in place. My first thought was that I must have misheard her, that no one could say something that cruel about their own husband, not after nearly 2 decades together. But Ruth's laughter confirmed it. Ruth leaned back in her chair and said, "You've been patient long enough. You deserve excitement, not this quiet life." Nora sighed, sounding almost bored. "He wouldn't see it coming anyway. He never notices anything unless I spell it out." My stomach twisted. I pressed my hand against the door frame, willing myself not to make a sound. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they would hear it. I stood there watching them as if I had stepped outside of my own body. Nora reached across the table, touching her mother's hand, smiling as if she was sharing some private joke. I had seen that smile before, but never directed at me like that. Ruth shook her head and said, "You wasted your best years waiting for him to be someone he'll never be. Don't let him drag you down any further." Nora nodded. "I won't. I've just been trying to figure out how to do it without looking like the bad guy." That was the moment I realized how little she thought of me. She wasn't just unhappy. She was planning her exit, already thinking about how to spin it so that she looked like the victim. I felt the air leave my lungs, and I had to grip the frame tighter to stay upright. In that moment, 1,000 memories crashed through my mind, her head resting on my shoulder during a thunderstorm, the way she used to hum when she cooked, the way she had once whispered that she couldn't imagine her life without me. Every memory cracked under the weight of her new words. I backed away slowly, careful not to let the floor creak. The sound of their laughter followed me down the hall. I went upstairs, shut myself in the bathroom, and stared at my reflection. My face looked foreign, pale and tight. I felt stripped down to nothing. When I finally came downstairs, they were still at the table, laughing about something else. Nora looked up, her expression smooth and unreadable. "Hey, there you are. We were just talking about maybe going to visit Aunt Linda next month." I nodded. My voice wouldn't come out. I went to the sink, filled a glass with water, and drank it slowly just to keep my hands from shaking. She kept talking as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just torn me apart sentence by sentence. That night, I didn't confront her. I couldn't. I didn't trust myself to speak without breaking. I took my pillow and blanket to the guest room and said, "I think I'll sleep in here tonight. You were snoring a bit last night." She barely looked up from her phone. "Fine. Do what you need to." I closed the door and stood in the dark. The guest room smelled faintly of cedar from the old dresser and the faint trace of dust that never seemed to leave. I sat on the bed trying to understand how everything had changed in a matter of minutes. The woman I thought I knew had looked me in the eye that very morning and asked if I could pick up milk from the store. She had kissed me on the cheek before her mother came over. That small gesture now felt like a performance, a lie wrapped in routine. Over the next few days, her words began to replay in my head in a loop. I heard her voice every time I tried to sleep. Fat, boring, waiting for the right time. It wasn't just the insult that hurt, it was the betrayal. I had given her every ounce of patience and loyalty I had. I had believed in the quiet strength of our marriage, and she had turned it into something to mock. I started to notice everything I had ignored before. The way she kept her phone face down when she set it on the counter, the sudden perfume I didn't recognize, the late nights she claimed were spent catching up on reports. I began to see the truth she had been hiding in plain sight. One evening, as she brushed past me in the hallway, her phone buzzed. A message flashed briefly before the screen went dark. I caught the words, "Can't wait till we don't have to sneak around anymore." She saw me looking, and her face stiffened for half a second before she smiled and said, "Wrong number." I said nothing. My silence unnerved her more than any accusation could have. From that day on, I moved through the house like a ghost. I made coffee, went to work, came home, and spoke only when necessary. She grew uneasy, sensing something had shifted, but she didn't know how much I had seen or heard. Each morning, she'd glance at me over her mug, trying to read my face. I kept it blank. Inside, something was changing. The part of me that had always believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt was fading. I began to write everything down, dates, times, details. I made copies of bank statements and receipts she thought I never saw. I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet, but I knew I wouldn't let her walk away after everything she had said and done. The quiet between us became its own kind of language. Every meal was eaten in silence. Every word was measured. And every night I lay in that guest room feeling my heart harden into something steady and deliberate. That whisper in the kitchen had ended one version of my life and started another. The man she had called dull and predictable was gone. What replaced him was a man who was done being humiliated. I didn't need revenge in the form she would expect. I just needed to reclaim the part of myself she had taken for granted. She thought I would never notice. She thought I would stay blind. But the moment I heard those words, everything inside me began to see with perfect clarity. The Monday after that conversation, the air in our house felt heavier. Every sound seemed louder. The click of Nora's heels on the kitchen tile, the buzz of her phone, the whisper of her hairbrush sliding through her hair in the morning. I kept to my routine, but inside, something had changed. I was no longer reacting. I was observing. Every word she said, every glance she gave, every moment she thought I wasn't paying attention, I memorized. At breakfast, she poured her coffee and said, "You're quiet lately. Everything okay?" I looked at her across the table, the woman who had once been my home. "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." She nodded, already looking at her phone again. I studied the way her thumb moved across the screen. She had learned to smile without looking up. That small gesture told me everything I needed to know. I spent the rest of the day at work, sorting letters and packages, pretending to listen to the casual chatter around me. My coworkers had no idea that I was running through every memory, every clue, building a quiet plan in my head. I handled dozens of envelopes every day, each one carrying something private. A message, a secret, a confession. That irony wasn't lost on me. During my lunch break, I drove to the bank. I sat across from the branch manager, a man I'd known for years, and asked about separating my accounts. I told him I was setting up a fund for a family project. He smiled and said it was smart planning. I nodded, signing the forms with a calm I didn't feel. From that moment on, I moved carefully. I gathered paperwork that Nora never bothered to check. Insurance policies, mortgage details, joint credit card statements. I took photos of them with my phone and uploaded them to a private drive. I stopped sharing details about my day, stopped telling her where I was going. She didn't notice at first, too wrapped up in whatever fantasy she was chasing. When I got home from work, I would sit in the guest room pretending to watch television, but my mind was miles away. I made lists of what I needed to do. Find a lawyer, document her affair, make sure the house was legally protected. I wasn't driven by anger anymore. It was something quieter and sharper, a need for dignity. A few nights later, my sister Mara called. She always sensed when something was wrong. "You sound different, Elle," she said. "What's going on?" I hesitated, then said, "You ever realize you've been trying to fix something that the other person already threw away?" There was a pause. "You're talking about Nora." "I heard her, Mara," I said. "I heard what she really thinks of me." Her voice softened. "What are you going to do?" "I'm not sure yet, but I won't let her decide when it ends. Not anymore." Mara didn't push for details. She just said, "Whatever you do, don't lose yourself in it." After that call, I sat for a long time in the dark, holding my mother's old locket. Inside was a tiny photo of her and me when I was a boy. I could almost hear her voice saying, "Kindness doesn't mean being blind." That became my anchor. Over the next few days, I noticed Nora growing restless. She'd step outside to take phone calls, her tone hushed but urgent. She'd come home later than usual, her excuses sounding practiced. Once she came in smelling like cologne that wasn't mine. I didn't ask about it. My silence made her nervous. She started watching me the way a liar watches for discovery. On Friday, I left work early under the pretense of a doctor's appointment. Instead, I met with a local attorney named Daniel Croy. His office was small and plain, tucked behind a row of insurance agencies. I sat across from him and told him everything in plain detail. No emotion, just facts. He listened quietly, then said, "Mr. Granger, if what you're saying is true, we can make sure you walk away protected, but you'll need proof." I already had it. I handed him the printed photos of her messages and her social media activity. He looked them over and nodded. "This will do." We drew up divorce papers that same afternoon. Daniel explained that once served, she'd have 30 days to respond. I told him to have them delivered by courier in 2 weeks. He asked if I wanted to confront her before then. I said no. I'd rather let the truth arrive for me. When I left his office, the cold air hit my face like a wake-up call. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. At home, Nora greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're home early," she said. "Felt like finishing some paperwork," I replied. She nodded, distracted, and went back to her laptop. I watched her from the doorway, wondering how long she'd been pretending to love me. I no longer felt the need to ask. That weekend, I spent most of my time outside, fixing the back gate, cleaning the garage, doing the small things that gave me peace. Ruth came by again on Sunday afternoon. I heard her voice through the window, asking Nora if she'd made up her mind. Nora said, "Almost." I smiled to myself and kept sweeping the porch. At night, I reviewed everything one last time. The documents were sealed, the letter written, the instructions given to the courier. I slept well for the first time in months. Nora must have noticed something in me changing because she started to hover. She asked if I was upset about something, if she'd done anything wrong. I looked her in the eye and said, "No, Nora, you've been perfectly clear." She didn't understand what I meant, but I saw her pulse quicken. She was starting to feel the ground shift beneath her. For 18 years, I had been the man who fixed things. I thought love meant holding on, patching up cracks, waiting for better days. Now I understood that sometimes strength means knowing when to stop repairing what's already been destroyed. The decision was made. The plan was in motion. In 2 weeks, she would open that envelope, and for the first time in our marriage, she would understand what silence can do when it finally speaks. 2 weeks passed with an eerie calm. Nora carried on as if everything were normal, but I could tell she felt something was off. She kept studying my face when she thought I wasn't looking, waiting for an argument that never came. I gave her nothing. My silence unsettled her more than shouting ever could. I woke each morning before sunrise, went to work, came home, cooked dinner, and said little. The distance between us was wide and cold, but I had made peace with it. The man she once described as predictable was now impossible for her to read. On the morning, everything changed. The sky was a dull gray and the air smelled of rain. I left early for work but parked my truck 2 streets away from the house instead. I waited there, with the engine running, staring at the front porch through the misted windshield. The courier was scheduled to arrive at 9. I wanted to see her face when she opened that envelope. At 8:57, a white delivery van pulled into our driveway. The driver stepped out with a clipboard and a sealed envelope tucked under his arm. I could see Nora through the living room window, still in her robe, a cup of coffee in hand. She opened the door, smiled politely, and signed for the delivery. I could almost hear her asking, "Who's this from?" When the courier left, she looked down at the envelope and frowned. The handwriting on the front was mine. She turned it over, saw the seal, and hesitated. For a long moment, she just stood there, holding it like it was burning her hands. Then she tore it open. Inside were 2 things, the divorce papers and a letter. I had written the letter by hand, carefully, slowly, making sure every word carried weight. It wasn't angry, it wasn't cruel, it was the truth, plain and final. It read, "Nora, I heard every word. You said I was getting fat and boring, that you were waiting for the right time. I'm glad you said it when you did because it reminded me that sometimes silence hides the deepest cruelty. You thought I wouldn't notice. You thought I would stay until you decided to leave. You were wrong. I've spent my life trying to make you happy, believing that love was about endurance. But love without respect is just waiting to be replaced. You made your plans in whispers. I made mine in daylight. I filed for divorce. Everything has been handled fairly. The house, the accounts, the car, all divided. You won't hear me raise my voice or beg for understanding. I won't fight you for something you've already thrown away. You wanted freedom. Now you have it. You wanted excitement. I hope you find it. But you'll have to live with the knowledge that the man you dismissed walked away without bitterness, without hate, and without regret. Elliot, From my truck, I watched her lips move as she read, watched the color drain from her face. She turned the pages of the divorce papers, confusion flashing across her features as she realized how thorough it all was. The evidence of her affair was included in a separate envelope, addressed to her and signed by my attorney. I could tell the exact moment she found it. Her hand went to her mouth. She sank into the nearest chair, eyes wide and wet. She read the text messages, the screenshots, the timestamps. Every detail she thought she had hidden was right there in her lap. When she looked up, she caught sight of me through the window. Our eyes met for the first time in weeks. She rushed to the door, still holding the papers. I got out of the truck and met her on the porch. "Elliot, please just talk to me," she said, her voice cracking. "There's nothing left to say," I replied. "You don't understand," she pleaded. "It didn't mean anything. I was angry. I said things I didn't mean." "You meant every word," I said quietly. "I know because you said them when you thought I wasn't listening. That's when people tell the truth." Tears spilled down her face, and she reached for my arm. I stepped back. "Elliot, please, we can fix this." I shook my head. "I fixed everything for 18 years, Nora. This one's yours." She dropped to her knees on the porch, clutching the papers against her chest. "Don't do this. I made a mistake. Please." The courier, still parked at the end of the driveway, glanced over awkwardly, sensing the tension. I kept my eyes on Nora, calm and steady. "You said you were waiting for the right time. I guess it came sooner than you thought." She sobbed, shaking her head. "You can't just walk away from everything we built." "I'm not walking away," I said. "I'm setting both of us free." Her voice broke into a whisper. "I never thought you'd actually leave." I took a breath, looking at the house we had built together, the one that had once been full of laughter and small dreams. "You stopped seeing me long before I decided to go. The only difference now is that I finally see you clearly." She looked at me with a kind of desperate disbelief, the realization settling in that there was no way back. The strength in her face melted into regret. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Rain began to fall lightly, tapping against the porch rail. I turned to leave. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Nora," I said. "Just remember what it cost." She tried to stand, but stumbled, the papers slipping from her hands and scattering across the floorboards. As I walked toward my truck, I heard her call my name, her voice raw and hollow. I didn't turn around. When I started the engine, the windshield wipers cleared the rain, and through the glass I saw her kneeling there, clutching the letter to her chest. The woman who once called me boring was now begging for the chance to speak. As I drove away, the weight I had carried for years began to lift. For the first time in a long while, I felt the quiet peace of a man who had nothing left to prove. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt release. The life I had known was gone, but so was the version of myself who lived in someone else's shadow. I wasn't the man she pitied or mocked. I was the man who finally chose himself. Behind me, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and let out a long breath. The rain fell harder, washing away the last of what used to be. The envelope had done its job. It spoke every truth I no longer needed to say. The day after I left, the world looked different. The air felt cleaner, the light sharper. I woke up in the small apartment I had rented above the hardware store downtown. It wasn't much, just a single bedroom, a worn sofa, and a tiny balcony that overlooked the main street. But it was mine. There were no arguments, no forced smiles, no tension hanging in the air. I made a pot of coffee and sat by the window watching the town wake up. People walked their dogs, shopkeepers unlocked their doors, and life went on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. For me, it had. For the first time in years, I felt free. My chest wasn't heavy anymore. My thoughts weren't tangled around what I needed to say or what I might have done wrong. I had always believed that walking away was a kind of failure, but now I understood it could be an act of self-respect. That morning, I called my sister. Mara's voice came through the line, warm and steady. "You sound lighter," she said. "I am," I told her. "It's strange. Everything I thought would break me ended up setting me free." She was quiet for a moment. "You did what you had to do, Elle. I'm proud of you." Her words hit something deep inside me. For months, I had lived like a man fading into the background. Now I felt like I had stepped back into my own skin. I spent the next few weeks putting my life in order. I closed the joint accounts, changed my mailing address, and sold the old pickup truck that carried too many memories. Every task felt like clearing a path through overgrown ground. I found old photos while packing, pictures of me and Nora smiling on vacations, laughing at birthdays, holding hands in front of that white house on Oak Ridge Lane. I didn't feel anger when I looked at them. I just felt distance, like watching a story that used to mean something but no longer belonged to me. One evening, while unpacking boxes, I found the locket my mother had given me. Inside, her faded photo smiled back. I ran my thumb over the metal and whispered, "You were right, Mom. Kindness doesn't mean being blind." The words brought a quiet peace I hadn't felt in years. The first weekend in the new place, I bought some paint and a few cheap canvases. I hadn't picked up a brush since I was in my 20s, back when I used to paint for the joy of it. I started small, a sunrise over a field, a still life of an old coffee mug, the reflection of a tree in water. The strokes were uneven at first, but it felt good to create something again. I painted late into the night, music playing softly in the background, the kind of music I used to love before life got too noisy. A few weeks later, I ran into one of Nora's co-workers at the grocery store. She looked surprised to see me. "Elliot, how are you holding up?" she asked carefully. "I'm doing better than I expected," I said. She nodded and hesitated. "Nora's been quiet. She's not herself lately." I didn't ask for details. I just said, "Sometimes silence is the only thing left to say." She looked at me as if she wanted to say more, but I thanked her and walked away. I didn't need to know how Nora was doing. That chapter was closed. Each day in that small apartment became a step toward rebuilding. I joined a community woodworking group, spent Saturday mornings helping fix benches in the park, and started jogging again. The man who used to live quietly for someone else was learning how to live for himself. One Sunday morning, Mara drove down from Michigan to visit. She brought her kids, who ran through my apartment laughing and chasing each other. When she saw the paintings on the wall, she smiled. "You did these?" "Trying to keep busy," I said. She walked closer and touched one of the canvases gently. "You're finding yourself again, Elle. It suits you." I made us all breakfast, and for the first time in a long while, I laughed without forcing it. The sound filled the room in a way that reminded me I was still capable of joy. Later that afternoon, after they left, I sat on the balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the sun dip behind the old courthouse building. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the silence, the final moment on the porch. It no longer hurt in the same way. It felt like a scar that had healed, a reminder of what I'd survived. I didn't hate Nora. Hate would have kept me tied to her. I didn't love her either. What I felt was gratitude for the lesson she never meant to teach me. She had shown me how dangerous it is to lose yourself trying to keep someone else happy. I started keeping a small journal, writing a few lines each morning before work. One entry read, "Peace isn't loud. It's the quiet that comes after you stop explaining yourself to people who never listened." That sentence became a kind of mantra. Months passed, and life settled into a rhythm that felt honest. The mornings were still, the nights restful. Every once in a while, I'd get a letter addressed to Nora that hadn't been updated in the system. I'd mark it, return to sender, and drop it into the outgoing bin. Each time I did, it felt symbolic, a clean break from what once was. I never looked back at that house on Oak Ridge Lane. I didn't need to. My story there had ended the moment she whispered those words. I had already begun a new one that didn't depend on someone else's approval. Now, when people ask me how I managed to stay calm through it all, I tell them this. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to give your pain an audience. Silence can be stronger than rage when it comes from knowing your worth. Every man reaches a point where he has to decide whether to keep patching the cracks or start rebuilding from the ground up. I chose to rebuild. The night before my divorce was finalized, I went out onto that little balcony again. The street below was quiet, the lights from the diner flickering across the pavement. I took a deep breath and felt something settle in me. I wasn't broken, I wasn't lost. I was simply free. And in that quiet freedom, I found what I had been searching for all along, Not a new beginning, but the strength to stand alone and still feel whole. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. This story wasn't about revenge or heartbreak. It was about reclaiming self-respect, finding peace, and realizing that walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stand up, stay silent, and move forward with dignity. If this story moved you, or if you've ever found the courage to let go of something that no longer served your peace, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up if it spoke to you, share it with someone who might need to hear it today, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real, emotionally powerful stories every week. Thank you for being here. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, peace is something you build when you stop waiting for others to give it to you.